Are you in the recovery field and looking to expand your knowledge of the many pathways to recovery? Do you want to network with the nation's leading recovery leaders? If so, then the Multiple Pathways of Recovery Conference is for you. The Multiple Pathways to Recovery Conference, where we share and educate one another about the many different pathways, methods, practices, programs, and belief systems recoveries can use to enhance their recovery journey and sustain long-term recovery. Whether it's a 12-step, secular, a spiritual religious modality, medication-assisted recovery, or wellness-based and sober active communities, we've got you covered. At MPRC, you'll have the opportunity to connect with the recovery community, broaden your knowledge of the multiple pathways, and be refreshed in your journey of recovery, whatever that may be. So don't miss out on this incredible opportunity. Tickets are on sale now at ccarconference.org. That's ccarconference.org. The Multiple Pathways to Recovery Conference, where all pathways to recovery meet.
Today we're talking with the Tommy Rosen. How are you, Tommy?
I'm excellent. I'm delighted to get to connect with you, Phil. So delighted.
Yeah, me too. And you're in London, England at the time of this recording.
I am. I'm in London, England. It's all happening.
Yeah, and I'm in Rhode Island, which is kind of the magic of today's world, and the internet and doing all this stuff. And we have a crystal clear connection, which is just amazing.
Incredible. Here we are. We're blessed.
Right. So we got the Recovery Matters podcast, right? And I'll just lead with a very general question to see where your thoughts are. What matters to you about recovery today, Tommy? What's on the top of your head?
I am concerned about what appears to me to be an emphasis on medication in the treatment of addiction. I am not anti-medication. I want to come out and say I'm not anti-medication. I recognize that there's a time and a place for it. I'm concerned about it becoming the standard, that it's the basis by which we've decided to treat addiction. And I think that's a mistake. So medication-assisted therapy has its place in a limited way. But I'm concerned that it's being taken too far, both in terms of the basis, it being the basis of the strategy, and also the length of time that we've decided to keep people on drugs.
Yeah.
And so that's what's on top of my mind right now.
Well, yeah, you picked a hot topic, didn't you? We are definitely aligned. And if you want to get, or I can get very cynical, is now we'll have these big pharmaceutical companies which will have the disease and the cure.
Right.
That poses some ethical considerations.
Yeah, I think they refer to that as conflict of interest, but
maybe.
Yeah. So I've been looking at this, and I hearken back in my mind to getting sober at Hazelden in 1989. And struggling with alcoholism and struggling with drug addiction as I was at the time, opiate addiction, cocaine addiction, and alcoholism, primarily in terms of substance. And back in those days, I mean, they showed you the couch and they showed you a bucket and they showed you a lot of love.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of support around you, but it was like, you're going to need to sweat this out for a few days.
Yeah.
And when you get through the worst of this, and while you're going through the worst of this, we will love you and we will take care of you. And in about 3 days, 5 days, maybe 7 days, in the worst of cases, you'll feel better. And we're going to put you through the 12 steps. We're going to begin that process, and there's going to be a lot of therapy, and we're going to take a look at your life, and we're going to try and figure out what happened.
Yeah.
Where you got off track, and we're going to try to help you to get back on track. And, and that's what it was. And it worked, by the way, like it worked. And then in 1995, you have, the advent of over-the-counter OxyContin.
Yeah.
So the FDA approves that. we get into a lot of trouble as a society. A lot of people start dying. A lot of people start experiencing addiction that you would never expect to experience addiction.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, I believe our leaders, meaning our political leaders, in conjunction with pharmaceutical companies and in conjunction with insurance companies, came to the decision that since so many people are dying from overdose, let's put them on long-term Suboxone
Mhm.
and other drugs that will limit the overdose,
Mhm.
that will decrease overdose numbers. But that the part of this equation that didn't get looked at was what's the effect that this is going to have long-term on a human being and on their recovery?
Yeah.
And by the way, is it true that this is actually going to actually reduce overdose numbers? Because since 1995 and since 2015, we've only seen an increase in those overdose numbers. So I'm so concerned about this.
Right. Rightly so. I think that goes into the earliest medication, and one of the biggest medications was methadone, as more a form of part of it was social control to decrease the crime rate and all that too. So yeah, uh, that's a fascinating topic. I am not anti-medication, but I believe people ought to have options. That when they get into recovery, if you feel medication is going to help you, okay, I support that. Tell me why. What do you think about it? Do you have any thoughts about getting off? Whatever, getting off the medication, it's up to you, though. It should be person-centered, person-driven. I got sober too in '87, no treatment program. I had cocaine and alcohol and just kind of white knuckled it myself and found a 12-step, which is abstinence based, and abstinence works for me, but I'm not an abstinence preacher. What works for you, go do what works for you. And so I see the benefits of not having to be on medication. And I also see the benefits now when going through a couple cancer treatments and all that, taking medication as prescribed, and that can be life-saving as well.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, certainly we're talking about different diseases here.
Yes.
Um,
Mhm.
and I appreciate that people have to be given options, and I am a very big proponent of many multiple pathways of
Mhm.
recovery. On that topic, I look at the opportunity cost. So you come to treatment and you're uncomfortable naturally,
Mhm.
and you're vulnerable.
Mhm.
And someone at the treatment center says to you, what we recommend is that you get on medication.
Mhm.
You don't have the wherewithal,
Right.
the knowledge, the experience to be able to advocate for yourself or to be able to choose another path or to even understand what that other path means.
Mhm.
So we talk about giving a person choice, but I'm not sure that it for that person, I'm not sure that they would be able to choose something else or that they would recognize what the consequences are of this particular choice.
So I think again that's based on the individual, because we've built a recovery coaching in the emergency department program, right? So
Yes.
we see about, in Connecticut alone, 500 people a month, and we ask them this question: how can we help you with your recovery today? Right? And they usually have an answer. I need to go to treatment, or I need to get this person out of my house, or I need to, get food for my kids, whatever it may be. But the second follow-up question, which we're really surprised at, is what does recovery look like for you?
Hmm.
Is a good question to ask, because then you start to get an understanding of what recovery might look for somebody. And then you can, of course, use your influence as a coach or make suggestions or ask more questions. But I agree, I don't think providers at the treatment level are necessarily as skilled at, you know, exploring an individual and what they do know about recovery and what they might think about it. And that, again, that's just a general comment. That's not all providers.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we all, and I mean, we all really want the same thing, which is,
Mhm.
I think we want to live
Mhm.
beyond addiction and help others to do the same.
Of course, yes.
That's the
Yeah.
bottom line. Sometimes we use the phrase, we need to meet people where they're at.
Hmm.
I can, I can only tell you, thank God nobody met me where I was at.
All right, meet me where's that? The Starbucks? No, just kidding. People where they're at.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I mean, you got to meet people when, if they're struggling and they're only willing to do X, Y, or Z, that's what the individual can do. For me, I had people, thank God, in treatment and beyond in the 12-step rooms and the rooms of yoga and all the other things that I've done in my recovery that really challenged me and
Yes.
really pushed me and said, those cigarettes you're smoking, like it will really be a good idea that you let that go.
Hmm.
And I was full on addicted to them and unable to, and at times unwilling to let it go. And I would say, I'm unwilling to let this go today. And they'd be like, okay, well, we're just letting you know that that's not going to help you in a lot of different ways.
Hmm.
Nowadays, I think people would say, oh my God, you smoke. Okay, we need to meet you where you're at. You're unwilling to let that go. Okay, you're a smoker. That's what it is. I seriously think so. To me, it's like throwing in the towel on the possibility
Right.
of something go because we're so afraid of going against somebody's opinion or their current addiction, and we think, well, we
Hmm.
can't push somebody too much,
Fascinating.
you know.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to going against person's ideas, but I would do it more in the form of a question. I would say something like, so if you continue to smoke this way, how do you think you're going to feel a year from now or
Yes.
10 years from now?
So motivational
Think
interview.
about it. Yeah, exactly. Just ask them a question.
Sure.
So can I tell you one of the first times I think I met you or saw you?
Yes.
Because it kind of ties into this multiple pathways topic is that you were speaking at some restaurant in Massachusetts. It seemed like it was out in the hills somewhere, and it was a
Oh yeah.
smaller group. And I was like, okay, we're gonna go get to see Tommy Rosen of Tommy Rosen 2.0, the Recovery 2.0 conference fame and all that. And I don't remember a lot. I remember your energy. Your energy was really good. Like it's really like, you feed off the energy of the crowd. You're a gifted speaker, somewhat of an entertainer, which I think you need to be to carry a message, right? But you talked about the guy from AA climbing up one side of the mountain and the guy from NA climbing up another trail up the mountain, and they get to the top and they argue about who got there the right way. And I have used that analogy so many times, but I also expand it to multiple pathways now that, there could be roads up the mountain, like the wide road could be a 12-step program, right? But now you got people discovering these narrow trails and steep trails and might be fraught with danger, but they make it to the top. But we still haven't really got to the point where we're all standing on the top of the mountain, looking at each other, seeing the light in each other's eyes, but we tend to argue about who got there the right way.
Love it. I love it. And I remember saying, so I'll invoke the name of Kate Duffy,
Okay.
who
Yep,
she runs Tipping Point Recovery, and that was an event that she put together.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
She brought us all together there, so grateful for that. And the basic idea is, if there's anything that two addicts of any kind who've recovered should never argue about, is how they recovered.
Right.
And there are so many ways, and of course, in your analogy or in that analogy, I'm just hoping that when we meet each other, we are actually meeting each other at the top of the mountain.
Hmm.
And we're not having that conversation in some canyon feeling like we're at the top of the mountain. So
That's
that's
it.
my concern,
Right.
But I couldn't agree with you more when you find as a human being,
Hmm.
especially in this day and age, when you find peace
Oh, yeah.
and you have a sense of belonging or purpose or meaning in your life, or you have connection and you have a sense of love, and you realize, okay, it's challenging to be a human being. It's also joyful. All these things are true. And you start to feel this sense of blessing just to have the opportunity to feel all of these things, the full gamut. When you have that, however, whatever road you took to get to that truth,
Hmm.
it's a road of recovery.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
that's just a beautiful thing. And so absolutely. And there are, as they say in all spiritual circles, the key teaching is many paths, one destination.
Hmm.
Many paths to the one spirit, if we're speaking spirituality, many paths to God, many paths to realization, many paths to recovery. And so I believe that.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, that's just the human experience that we hope to evolve and get to that level of connectedness, right? Or yeah, I agree. Um, so you talked a lot about multiple pathways, and one of the you were an early um, proponent of yoga, and tell me how you found that and what it's done for you in your life
Yes.
in a
Well,
few minutes.
sure. Well, it first of all, when I found yoga, I was 60 days sober. So it's just 2 months sober. It was 1991. At that time, I had gotten sober in 89. I had stayed sober for 1 year. I had relapsed and gone out for a year and tried to get sober again. I finally did. And then 60 days after I finally got sober, I walked literally into a yoga class off the street.
Hmm.
I had I had heard about it. There was I really mean this, Phil. There was a a neon sign, yoga.
Hmm.
It's right on the street in San Francisco. I can see it like it was yesterday. And I went in and I took that class. I wrote about it in the book Recovery 2.0, and that experience changed my life forever. I felt at ease in my body. After that class, I laid there at the end of class, as you do in what they call rest pose.
Hmm.
In rest pose, I just laid there and I felt relaxed, um, at peace. I felt alive. I felt my whole body was vibrating and was. I felt like blood was just pouring into tissues and areas of my body it hadn't been before. And it really was exactly that. It was that I started to realize that yoga was a way to unravel the stress pattern of addiction in my life. That it was one thing to realize, okay, I have a problem. I'm going to meetings and I realize I need to do some things to live my way into a new life. This was like a toolbox, a powerful toolbox for achieving relaxation in the mind and body. That's first, primarily, that's what yoga was and is still today for me. On a deeper level, yoga became a vehicle by which I could realize the greater possibility of recovery and of this life. That when I was new, going back to our original conversation, when you're new, you don't know what to shoot for.
Hmm.
You don't, I mean, how do you know what you can shoot for? Right? You're just scared, you're upset, you're kind of at the bottom, you're not feeling particularly good about yourself. And all you know to shoot for on a 1 day at a time basis, because people tell you, is stay sober.
Yeah.
Go to bed tonight sober. And that's a victory. And it is a victory. That's an unbelievable victory for someone who's been stuck in addiction. It's just that the evolution of recovery needs to involve some new ideas. And yoga started to show me those new ideas. When you're 5 years sober, are you saying the same things? Do you have the same language? Are you still have the same problems that you had when, 5 years ago? When you're 10 years, 15, 20 years sober, are you still struggling in the same kind of ways? What could you do to learn the lessons of life so you don't struggle in those same ways anymore? Yoga has been that vehicle for me.
That's extraordinary, and I'm sure everybody you talk to has a yoga story. Well, my yoga story actually started probably just 3 years ago. I mean, I had dabbled here and there, but I got a little yoga app. I don't even remember what it was, and I started to do it daily. And um, w- I was doing it as I got older. I wanted to be more flexible. So it was really physical, but I found also a lot of peace with it. But I wanted to be more stretchy because I'm not a stretchy dude at all. I am kind of stiff and mechanical. And I practiced for almost 2 years. And when I stopped was when I started to undergo cancer treatment. But the yoga had kept me in got me in really good, flexible condition that I think I was able to deal with the chemotherapy and all that in a much better way. So now I'm just waiting for I'm doing a little bit of stretching, sitting on the mat type of yoga, nothing too strenuous, but I'm eager to resume because I'm 64 years old, retiring this year. And, when you go through a second round of cancer and you face your own mortality and you hear Bob Dylan singing to you, knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door, you start to think about, what do I do with the time I have left?
Mm.
Part of that is my body, and keeping that in good condition is how I enjoy life. And yoga is probably the best thing I found, that and walking, two simple things to keep me in shape.
Yes. Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that and
Mhm.
your intimate experience with chemo and going through this. For sure, yoga has a lot to offer everybody,
Oh yeah.
and it's I look at it like from one perspective. I'm as a person in recovery, I know what it means to feel uncomfortable in my mind, uncomfortable in my body,
Mhm.
and to want to do something about that.
Yeah.
And I got pretty good back in the old days at doing things about that were ultimately destructive
Hmm.
and not helpful. Yoga was, thank God, it ended up being the great upgrade, and that there was an upgraded way for me to
Mm.
find comfort in the mind and body. And I think it's important for people, all people, to know this, but particularly people in recovery, because we really lean into wanting to solve the problem of our chronic pain, whether that pain is physical or emotional. And what you're going through, I'm so glad that you have had that opportunity to practice a little bit,
Hmm.
help you endure the rigors of chemo so that you can move through that and then get to a much better place
Yeah.
in body. So yeah, thank you for sharing that testimony about the power of yoga, because it doesn't take a lot. It just takes a little to strengthen.
No, and I had like an alarm set, something simple, 7 in the morning. Okay, drop what I'm doing, and I would go 20 minutes to 30 minutes. I wasn't like, going crazy, but I just noticed 25 minutes a day makes a huge difference, and to my whole day. It's amazing.
Huge, huge. I
Yeah.
love. Yeah.
So, well, yeah, can I I'm gonna jump off a different way now.
Go. Let's go.
I'm curious. So you talked about not being comfortable in your mind or your head. What were you like as a child?
Are you ready to make a difference in the lives of others? If so, then you should consider becoming a recovery coach. Recovery coaches are trained to help people in recovery, seeking recovery, or struggling with addiction. They provide support, guidance, and resources to help people on their recovery journey. CCAR Training is the leading provider of recovery coach training programs. Our programs are designed to teach you the skills and knowledge, what we call the science, while giving you an understanding of your own art needed to be a successful recovery coach. We offer a variety of training options, most offered online. If you're interested in becoming a recovery coach or just learning more, I encourage you to visit our website or contact us today. We would be happy to answer any questions you have and help you get started on your journey to becoming a recovery coach. We hope you'll visit us at www.addictionrecoverytraining.org to learn more.
My childhood was characterized by, first and foremost, hyperactivity. I couldn't sit still. When I mean I couldn't sit still, you have to just take it at face value. I could not sit still.
Mhm.
I would not sit still. You would never see me sitting. focusing, or, I was always running around, always playing sports,
Hmm.
bouncing off the walls through my house, literally running from one room to the next. And I characterized my childhood as bouncing off one wall or another. And I also had an atrocious sugar-addled diet,
Oh.
which really went, there was like a kerosene to the fire, for
Mhm.
someone like me. And so I was anxious as a kid. I was on the anxious side, hyperactive side, move, move, move. And I think movement really was the way that I avoided this sense of anxiety. I just kept moving, and I would watch a lot of TV. I would play a lot of video games, and I would run around.
Hmm.
Something always had to be sort of distracting or focusing my mind on something. I played sports, and when I played sports, I was focused on the sport and what I was doing, and that was kind of like a relief.
Right.
It was also joyful and a wonderful outlet. But as I look back, it was also there was a need to it.
Mhm.
If I didn't have it or I didn't do it, I would become very, very irritable, very uncomfortable. And the other thing I noticed a lot about my childhood was I got sick a lot. My immunity was very low. My vitality, sort of came and went in terms of sickness. I got a lot of bronchitis. My lungs were a point of weakness in my body. My throat, a lot of strep throat. And I spent a lot of days at home legitimately sick. And I was plagued by migraine headaches,
Hmm.
debilitating, terrible, terrible migraine headaches. That was,
Wow.
but I also want to say that I mean, that sounds so horrible, like I must have had a horrible childhood. I had a lovely childhood in so many ways.
Hmm.
Also, I was excited. I was an excited kid, and
Hmm.
I loved sports so much, and I loved people so much, and the bright side of my challenges, the bright side of this personality was that I really, really loved being alive. I
Yeah.
just I just
Mm.
wasn't so great at managing it yet.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New York City.
Oh, so there's a lot to do.
Funny to do.
Yeah. I grew up in Manchester, Connecticut, just outside of Hartford, but I also had I we share a lot of similarities. But my need was I was instead of bouncing off walls, literally I was outside, catching snapping turtles, riding bikes miles away. Summer, running until you had that feeling in your lungs like you couldn't barely breathe, which you're on the brink of heat exhaustion, but you don't know that, all that. So, I like that alcohol for me took the anxiety right away, that all of a sudden I could talk to girls. I mean, 13 years old, middle school dance. I walked up to Marlene and asked her to dance, and we were having a good time until I threw up on her shoes, that kind of thing. Um, but then, when I got into my 20s, like found Pablo Escobar's product and cocaine in the 80s. I was a golf pro on cocaine at the time. It was like craziness. But with all that hyperactivity, it's funny, I chose this mega stimulant to be like a drug of choice. It's just weird how that happens.
Well, you and I share that.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was funny too, that someone like me would somehow gravitate to a drug like that, but I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And I never found opiates in the form of like, I mean, we were doing some things like some pills, but once in a while, but I never found heroin. And to me, I think that was a power greater than myself, God, that just kept me away from that. Otherwise, my plans would have all been foiled if I had found that. Um, and then that brought me to my knees, and I just kind of said, I always say it was a rocket ship to hell for me. And I mean, 36 years later, I can still have like Coke dreams or thoughts of Coke and what that made me feel like internally. It's just, one day at a time, but I've learned how to work through those now too.
Yes. I I remember the way that I originally found my way to opiates was because I was doing so much cocaine
Right.
and then crack cocaine that I literally couldn't sleep. And
Yeah.
people that I was around had opiates, and I never shot it,
Yeah.
but I would snort it or smoke it. And it was the one thing that, from a nervous system perspective, could equalize out the cocaine
Right.
just so I could sleep. And
Yes.
it was an unbelievably traumatic experience what I did to myself
Right.
with cocaine. It was trauma. And it's amazing that you could suffer so badly in a feeling and go after it again and again. And heroin took that away, that the psychotic trauma of it. So
Yeah.
at the end of the night, I could go to bed, I could handle and manage this and come back to, fight another day. And
Yeah.
it was a dark, dark combination of things to find.
I had a dealer that would say, well, if you can't sleep, take this. And I didn't, so you just brought that to mind. I hadn't thought about that in years. I don't know what he gave me, but it was a pill and I took it. I don't know if I would ever wake up again. I just, trust your local dealer. He'll get you to sleep. Oh my gosh. Um, I think too, I hadn't really thought about it like the self-induced trauma. And I think I do like that. You got me thinking about it because there's so much about the guilt and shame and knowing I should be doing something different, or I felt like, and I just couldn't or wouldn't and kept. And when you say you keep turning back, that's the part that normies don't get about addiction is that physical, mental, spiritual, emotional craving and desire to use the drug. Because I remember getting the drug, like a cocaine, and I just lived like for that first snort, right? And then it didn't hit me the way it did the first time. And then everything else was just hell, even when I was doing it. It didn't even really feel that good or do anything. It was painful. It's really painful.
Oh God. I mean, I look back at what I, did, and I recognize that I did it under the unbelievable weight of addiction.
Hmm.
I truly, honest to God, like I forgive myself.
Yeah, me too.
And as I remember it though, I'm like, oh gosh, Tommy, oh, almost like I feel badly for myself, like I'm a little boy.
That's a
Like,
good way to put it. That's a great
yeah,
way to put it.
like,
I feel
oh
that.
gosh,
I feel that. I feel that too. I really do.
yeah.
Um, so when you started to get into yoga, was it yoga with 12 steps? Were there other parts of your recovery journey that you'd like to mention that
I would
helped?
love,
Yeah.
yeah, I would love to. Gosh, man, I would love people to understand the power of the 12 steps.
Yeah.
I'd love them to be inspired by it and to at least give it a shot. And you can certainly Google, and you can hear all kinds of negative things about the 12 steps. And in this day and age, you can find every opinion, right, on any topic. And so my direct experience was that in Hazelden, where I went to treatment, and I don't know how they do it today, but in those days you were told, all right, we're going to begin this process of the 12 steps, and you, in these 28 days, you're going to do the first 5 steps.
Right.
We're going to guide you through 1 through 5,
Hmm.
and then we're going to recommend that you continue the process. And so we had, obviously, in a very safe environment, we had group therapy, individual therapy, and then you had meetings, and you went to meetings every day. You started to feel what it's like to sit in a circle and tell your truth and listen to other people's truths. And then you did the work, which was to sit down and read out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, was what we looked at in those days. And or the basic text of Narcotics Anonymous, or any of those texts are all legitimate to me. My experience was to work with that big book, and you read and you did the writing. And then the last thing we did in treatment before they sort of graduated you was you worked with the guy who was there. You could choose anybody, but there was a pastor a father that was there, and he was a pretty cool guy. And so as was recommended, I decided to do my fifth step
Mhm.
with him, which was to share what I had learned in my personal inventory of looking at my resentments and all the things that had happened for me and in my life. And so I did that. And I got very clearly that this was going to be a piece of the puzzle. And then the strangest thing happened, that amnesia that we get. I left treatment,
Mhm.
and I remember them saying, you really got to go to meetings. You really got to go to meetings. So I was like, okay, that I can do. But I forgot about the 12 steps.
Mhm.
I forgot about doing the work. I just went to meetings. I went to one meeting a day
Mhm.
for the first sort of 6, 7, 8 months of my recovery. I had no recovery and no communication with anybody in recovery other than going to that 1 hour meeting a day.
Mhm.
I got to it, but I was disconnected, totally disconnected from the idea that like recovery in my life were not separate entities.
How about that?
And I didn't get the idea that
Yeah.
this was a good thing, and that this was something that I wanted to do, and this would be good for me and lead to some wonderful places. I just missed that. I had forgotten that. And so after about that, I guess I was 1 year and 4 days sober. And I was at a party. I had just graduated from college. There was all the college parties happening, and I was kind of floating in and out of these meetings by this point. And I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm confused. And some guy offered me, hey, do you want to smoke some pot? And I sort of did one of these moves. I looked over both shoulders to see, is anybody watching?
Mhm.
And then I said, sure.
Right.
And I started to smoke pot, and then I started to drink, and then I started to do a bunch of psychedelics. And then one night, I found myself back to cocaine, just one night. And that's all it took. And I was immediately back in the dread and the horror of what had taken place a few years before.
Where were you at where
That was
located?
New York City. I remember
Still in New York.
June the 11th, January the 11th,
Yeah.
1991. 2 months later to the day, my mother would die from lung cancer, which really had turned into everything cancer.
Mhm.
And she had seen me come home from that relapse.
Oh.
And I tell you, I really don't have many regrets in my life.
Mhm.
But if I could go back and do that one over again, so
Mhm.
she didn't have to see that, I'd like to have a redo on that one.
I hear you.
Truthfully, it doesn't haunt me. I know she's gone now, and I know she forgives me and understands much more than I could ever understand about life from beyond the body.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was tough for me. And I would spend the next 4 or 5 months sort of stumbling in and out of recovery. And then finally on June the 23rd, 1991, I walked into a meeting in New York City. I raised my hand in earnest. I said, I'm 1 day sober. I went back the next day, 1 day sober. I went back the next day, 1 day sober.
There you go.
And this guy cornered me and he said, hey man, what do you think your problem is?
Good question. Yeah.
And I literally stuttered.
Mhm.
I stuttered. And he said, that's right. You have no idea what your problem is.
Mhm.
He said, your problem is that you're walking around the earth with untreated addiction.
Mm.
And it hit me, and the tears just immediately came down. And he said, there's a solution to this problem.
Mhm.
And it's in these steps. And then he delivered what's now the famous line, famous to me anyway. He said, I'm your sponsor now. He just declared it, For those who may not be familiar with the 12 steps, you usually are the one to ask somebody to sponsor you.
Right.
But this guy,
He appointed himself to be yours.
he did, but he saw in me a very desperate and
Right.
very unhappy young man. And
Mhm.
I got sober.
an appointment of love.
Yes.
You talked when you were beginning this, that the power behind 12 steps. And what I've come to realize over the last, really in the last 10 years, is people are 12-step positive and way out there. This is some can be way out there. This is the only way. This is the way sit down, shut up, and do it this way. And then there's people that are way out on the other end of completely 12-step negative. That it's a cult, it's killing people, it's ruined my life. And I'm like, wow, those are like symbolic of a lot of things. But you don't hear anybody talk about like maybe being 12-step neutral or more in the middle, or, for me, it's very positive. Do I realize maybe there's some faults with, the language in the book and the meetings? And of course there are, but that's everything. But I also, I try to be realistic and objective, but it's hard. I cannot ignore what it did for my life. Working the steps changed my thinking so I could function in the world.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I love what you said. And I think, extremism,
Mm-hmm.
on either side of the coin is not ultimately helpful. I would say skillful.
Right.
But I will say this, Recovery 2.0 came about because I at 12 years sober, really 9 years sober, I reached kind of a bottom within recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to people in the 12-step world about my suffering and what I was experiencing. And they were saying the same things that they had always said, which is what they'd been trained to say and what had worked for them.
Right.
And it had worked for me up until a certain point. And then I recognized the answer that I'm seeking is not here. Meaning it's not contained in these 12 steps.
Mm-hmm.
And as I went back and read through the 12 steps yet again, as it was suggested that I do, what I saw there was an emphasis on the idea that there may be times that we need to reach for outside help. Outside meaning outside of these steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And but I was also finding a lot of extremism in the rooms where I would say, I'm just suffering so badly in my relationships, and I'm really experiencing a lot of stress. I'm 9 years sober, and I feel like I don't really have a solution to this.
Mm-hmm.
People would say, well, keep going to meetings, help the newcomer, and, keep coming back and it'll work itself out. This is what we've been told.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it every day, weeks, months on end. And I was still suffering so badly that a day came where it was January the 2nd, the year 2000. January the 2nd, the year 2000, I made a conscious decision to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't intending to use drugs and alcohol. I wasn't intending to go back. In fact, I had no desire. I was just unhappy and very sort of stressed out and crazed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left. And all my friends in the program were saying, you are in the grips of the disease. You are going to
die.
You're going to die.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm scared of that. I am scared of that. And no, I don't have that intention, but I understand what you're saying to me. We've all been sober together this decade behind me, and shit, I don't know, but I'm just telling you that I'm so unhappy. I have to look for something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went out looking, and I found, after a couple of years, through a lot of therapy and very unusual route, I found a life teacher, a spiritual teacher who was coming from the world of yoga.
Mm.
And he helped me. And he painted a more complete vision of recovery than I had ever been given. He gave me tools to help reach beyond the current place I was, to to really change not just my thinking again, but to change me almost at the molecular level, like in my blood, in my cells,
Your DNA.
in my DNA. I started to shift in a way, and the practices that I was doing, the yogic practices, which I've been doing for the last 21 years, have been, on the one hand, challenging, on another hand, unbelievably liberating.
Mm.
And it all came together in this package that I screaming from the rooftops, please, like, don't stop. Like, if you're struggling in the 12 steps, but you've been liberated from drugs and alcohol, like I was,
Mm-hmm.
there's yet another level.
Mm.
There's more work that you could do. And I just want you to know about it, which is why I get so heated about the medication thing, because nobody knows about the meditation thing. So we got medication versus meditation. So I'm like, wait, if only you knew, if only you knew. And I want you to see, please, please look here and give these things a try. It's not quick like a pill. It's not quick, unfortunately. But it's, oh God, it's worth it. It's so worth it to set yourself free.
My sponsor helped me a lot too, and he's maintained contact because I too, around the same time, started to really decrease my meeting attendance in 12-step program in the 10 to 12 year mark. Part of that was the launching. I was the first person hired at the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery, and I'm finishing up, I'm in my 26th year here doing that. So there was a way to turn my spirituality into a ministry almost, where we had this ability to help others, which I know is a part of yours as well, Recovery 2.0. But what he taught me was the most important word in the step where it says sought through prayer and meditation was sought. And so he said, never cease, never stop being a seeker.
Mm.
Always continue to seek. And I think that's what I've done. I hear that, and just the way you're telling your story is that you knew something's wrong, but you're just being called to seek something. You don't know what it is. And I found like things that were just miraculous in a lot of ways. And also in 10 years, Sandy and I had 4 kids, and I had a daughter from my first marriage. And when you get into recovery, you also become a citizen. You also become a husband. You become a father. And sometimes those roles supersede the other roles, of like, I'm going to be recovery expert or guru or perfectionist, and I'm going to I knew I wasn't going to use, and I knew I was seeking, and I knew that God was involved in my life. I knew I was okay. So I just carved out another road. And now that I'm retiring, I'm actually looking forward to going back to 12-step meetings and just sitting and listening to what you said earlier in the podcast, people telling their truth and me telling my truth, because I still have yet to find a place, very rarely, that people are as honest and open and telling their truths as willing as a 12-step meeting. I just haven't found it.
100%. I couldn't agree more. A very unique thing. I sometimes sit in those circles, and if I'm speaking, I'll say, I'm sitting in this circle of liars and cheaters and thieves.
Right.
And there's no circle in the world I'd rather be a part of.
Amen.
That this is a circle of course, people have been through, those behaviors, recognized the pain of it,
Mm-hmm.
grew to learn the cause of it and the solution for it. And now get to be in this, exalted place with each other, in love with life, and being able to work through it one day at a time. I just, it's so special. I wish our governments would run in somewhat in this way.
And what I really like is the lack of judgment too. I mean, you might be saying, well, that person's whacked, or like they see you and that kid needs help or whatever, but it's all out of like a love, Um, and you won't, you, I, I mean, out of all the meetings, a handful of times where somebody talked down to somebody, maybe, but it's just a wonderfully supportive, nurturing environment. Um, we hope to create those types of environments at our multiple pathways of recovery conference. We started those several years ago, and just to embrace multiple pathways. Any thoughts about the upcoming conference or anything you want to mention about that?
Yes. Well, first of all, the work that you're doing and all the folks there at CCAR is incredible.
Thank you.
And not only are you carrying a message, but you are actually training other people to carry the message in a very powerful way.
Mhm.
And so that is so important. And I'm delighted, really, really honored and delighted that you have asked me to come and speak this year and be a part of it. And I'm just so excited. And you know, it's about for me. Anyone listening to this now sort of gets it. I think that I'm excited to share um, the story, this version of this greater recovery story, which is say what I've experienced, and to share the non-pharmacological tools
Yes.
of yoga and breath work and meditation and connection. And I can't. I'm so grateful that I can share that.
Yeah, we are too. I think that's part of um, my personal purpose in life. A couple of years ago, both my parents died. They were divorced 40 years, but died within 48 hours of each other. And then I got myself into trouble with this cancer thing again. I just thought I had a stomach bug or GI issue, and they took out a couple pieces of my intestine, kind of an emergency surgery and biopsy, and then I ended up with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which I went for treatment with. So when you have all these things happen, especially later in life, and I know I'm way, way older than you, you're still a youngster.
I, I think we're pretty close, actually.
No, I know, but I think I'm older than you. I was born in 59, so I think I'm way older than you.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think for me, the meaning of life is, and I wrestled with that question for almost decades, and it became different for me, purpose and meaning. Meaning to me, the way I've tuned into my creator lately is to enjoy life,
Mm.
but I think there are two caveats to that. That the caveat is we have to do our best to make life more enjoyable for others. And I think that's the recovery process, because I'm a heck of a lot more happy now in recovery than I was when I was addicted. And the second part became much a bigger thing, that if this earth is our spaceship, we have to keep it in good enough condition so that others can enjoy life too while they're on this ride. So it became kind of like, and I just thought, at this point in your a 30-year recovery, this point in your life, do you have any thoughts on meaning and purpose and yeah.
Yes, that's obviously isn't that the question?
It is the question.
Yeah. Um,
What is the meaning of life?
the through the work. So first of all, I love what you said.
Mhm.
That to enjoy life and to help others to enjoy theirs,
Mhm.
and those going hand in hand. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I think the there's a light within me,
Mhm.
and there's a light within you,
Mhm.
and there's a light within all of us. And let's call that light our true nature
Mhm.
or our divinity. So
Correct.
that the divinity that flows through us.
Mhm.
And I think that addiction is to be in total disconnection from that innate divinity, from that light within. And
Mhm.
so recovery moves us closer to that divinity within. and brings us to that union with the divinity within, which is called yoga. The definition of yoga actually means union.
Mhm.
And so to realize that the divinity within me, or I believe that if for anyone to fully realize their own divinity and live from that divinity and contribute in whatever multitude of ways each of us can, is, I believe, the purpose of life. And I also believe that anybody can do it, that it's available to everybody, no matter your situation, it's available to everyone equally.
Mhm.
And I also believe that it's a great tragedy to die without realizing it.
Mhm.
And so I think that's what gets me up in the morning. That's what thrills me about helping people move beyond addiction, particularly because it's so the opposite of this thing that I think is worth fighting for and living for and to achieve. Yeah, that's the thing that fuels me the most.
Wow. Well, I think that's a good note to wrap it up on. So, are you going to be in New Haven for the 3 days, do you think?
Yes. Oh, yes.
So, I'm hopeful that we could grab a meal together. I would love to just strengthen
We
our.
have to.
Okay.
We
Deal.
have. If you're willing, I'll be there. You tell me where to go, and I'll show up there, Phil.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you, Tommy, so much. What a pleasure this was for me. What a treat.
For me too. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.